and welcome to As It Is Written. My name is Ryan, and I hope that you are having a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful New Year's Eve. I hope that that you have a nice, safe night tonight as we celebrate the end of 2022 and the beginning of 2023. So as part of that celebration, I have some Joe Rogan Experience video clips for us to watch, and I hope that you enjoy.
About the ideas that the universe is in a constant state of contraction
no,
and
it
expansion.
Isn't. No. Well, I mean, some people think
abandoned?
that. No, it's not been abandoned. Some physicists still argue that there's a cycle because it looks nice, and they are. Okay. But I think most people. I mean, there's some people who are arguing for that.
Do you think they're just trying to tie up something neat?
Well, I think they're trying to tie up their ignorance in something that isn't any more plausible than the picture that it expands forever. And as far as we can tell, the most likely possibility is that our universe will expand forever. But to make you a little bit happier, it's quite possible. The best pictures that we have of the early universe is that our universe isn't unique, isn't alone. That there are many universes. We call it a multiverse, and that at any instant in time, in kind of a cosmic super time, there's always a universe being born. So that multiverse might be infinite and eternal.
Where are they?
Outside of our universe.
How's that even possible?
Of course it's possible.
I understand. I'm not questioning it.
Okay, here's one. Well, first of all, the simplest possibility is that they're outside the region we can see, right? For example, the edges of our visible universe, space is expanding faster away from us than light. Because, we taught you in school nothing can travel faster than light. You may remember that from school.
Right.
We lied.
Oh.
Okay. Well, no, you have to parse it more carefully like a lawyer. Nothing can travel through space faster than light, but space can do whatever the hell it wants. So,
no, it can't. Space is not a thinking entity. It is not a being. It is not anything other than immaterial non-matter. Actually, it's just energy. And so, there is no thinking to it. It's not like it decided to do what it wanted to do. And so, space is going to do whatever God tells it to do, whatever God designed it to do. And that's what we really need to understand here, is that space isn't deciding to travel anywhere. It just does what it was created to do, as everything else in our universe does.
Locally, as I told you, the radio host is at rest. They're not moving, and the other end of the galaxy, at the other end of the visible universe, and we're at rest. But the space between us is expanding, so that galaxy, like a surfer, is being carried away from us faster than light. Relative to the water, the surfer isn't moving, right? But relative to the shore, the surfer is, right?
Right.
Okay, so this galaxy is not moving relative to its local surroundings, but it's moving away from us faster than light. And like a surfer in an undertow, they can swim really fast in the water, but if the water's moving away from the shore, they'll never make it back to the shore, right? And so that galaxy, the light from that galaxy is traveling through space at the speed of light, but if the space in between us and the galaxy is moving faster than light, then the poor light can never make it to us. We call that a horizon.
Wow. So the space is traveling too far for the light to reach us. So
too fast. Space is
too fast.
So this light can't catch up with the expansion of space, and it never gets to us. And that galaxy disappears from our causal horizon, we call it. We'll never be able to see it. We'll never be able to interact with it. We'll never be, okay? And it could be that there are different regions so far away from us where space is expanding faster than light, which have a very different history than our own. So space could be infinite. Just our simple space that we know of and love could be infinite in extent, and different regions of that space had different histories. And some of those regions, everything we can see, we know emerged from a single point. Okay? We can tell that. We can tell that by measuring the Big Bang expansion of everything we see and working backwards. And the universe.
And that's one of the things that actually destroyed a lot of the arguments that scientists used to have against God. If the universe has a creation and a date where it was non-existent and then it pops into existence, maybe not a date because that would have been outside time. So if the universe goes from not existing to existing, then it has to have had something that created it. And what the Bible tells us is that that something is God, and that something has a personality, is actually three persons in one: God the Father, God the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so what we see is that God actually created everything, and that everything in science that we've learned only serves to prove that more and more true. And what science really is it's the it is a system by which we can go about learning about God's creation. That is what science was created to do, and that's what science still does, even despite the best efforts of some of the top scientists today.
Our visible universe was once smaller and smaller and smaller. If we go back in time, we can actually follow the laws of physics back to the earliest moments of the Big Bang until those laws break down, and we can make predictions about what the universe should look like. All those predictions agree exactly with the observations we make, which tell us that that picture works. But another region, if you wish, could have come from a different Big Bang.
But is that another universe, or is it a part of the universe that we can't see?
Here's how we've changed. And this is semantics, but non-trivial semantics. Namely, when I was a kid, universe meant everything.
Everything, right.
But we say that's a pretty stupid definition. A better definition is an operational one. Universe means that region of space with which at one time we could have communicated, or one time in the future, even if the future is infinite, we might communicate with.
That is a terrible definition of what the universe is. So if you look at what the roots of the word universe mean, it means uni, which is one, and then verse, which is akin to a line of a verse from like a poem. So like a line of spoken words. And so originally what universe meant, because that's a very weird definition of the word universe, and a weird etymology of the word universe, and what it originally meant is it meant that God spoke one line and created the entire, and created all of creation. And so that is what the definition of the universe is. The universe has to be everything inside of which, inside of God's creation, inside of what was created. And this new definition that he's throwing out there of anything that we could have interacted with or could interact with in the future, well, at one point, the entire universe was a single point. And so we could have interacted with that at one point. Now we can't. And that's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean that it's a different universe. That just means that it's a different part of this universe that we couldn't travel to. We couldn't travel to Mars until the 70s or 80s, but that doesn't mean that it's part of a different universe from us. That's a silly definition. So I think that Lawrence Krauss is probably a very smart individual, but this is a very silly definition to change universe to, as it now has basically no meaning.
Because that describes the region of space where cause and effect works.
Some measurable distance.
Yes. And so we think of a universe as that region which could, throughout which everything could affect everything else, ultimately, in an infinitely long time. And in that picture, universes can be restricted in size. And then other regions which could never have affected us, and which will never affect us in the future, we call other universes.
I see.
And now there are many different versions of a multiverse, but that's the simplest version. And this picture we call inflation, which I just did two little clips associated with the new book. One was for a publisher, and one was for Big Think. One is the universe in under 2 minutes. So you can look up online, look for Lawrence Krauss Explains the Universe in Under 2 Minutes, where I talk about this cosmic expansion and how it might mean there's a multiverse. But the other is I explain the universe in terms of this beer bottle that I talked about to you earlier. So that's a video. You can watch that. But this theory of inflation, which actually says our universe, the qualities that we see of our universe can best be explained if some early time in the history of the universe, when it was a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second old, it had a huge expansion suddenly and increased in size by 30 orders of magnitude in size, in a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a billionth of a second, which is, by the way, particle physics suggests is highly plausible, even though, okay, and then it would produce a universe that looks more or less like we look like, and it's right now the only explanation of how that would cause the universe to look like what it looks like. But the neat thing about inflation is, it's eternal. So inflation, that puffing up ended in our universe, and then boom, a hot big bang followed it. Okay, so the universe puffed up by a huge amount, then all of that energy, which was stored in empty space, got released like the beer bottle, and we got a hot big bang, and the rest is history. But that's locally. But somewhere else, between us and there, space is still expanding exponentially. And faster and faster and faster. And only maybe somewhere else today, boom, like an ice crystal forming, boom, that region of space is suddenly left inflation. And maybe a gazillion years in the future, there'll be another region of space that's expanding away from us so much faster than light, so we'll never know about it, where suddenly that region leaves inflation, and boom, another hot big bang happens. And it turns out in each of those hot big bangs, after the inflation ends, depending upon how it ends, the laws of physics could be different in that universe. And so we tend to think it's quite likely that there are many, many separate regions of space, and in fact it's eternal, so such regions are forming eternally for all time, and there are hot big bangs happening in many regions, and the properties of each of those regions, whether they're conducive to forming galaxies and stars and planets and people, may be different. So we could say, logically in that picture, that the reason the universe looks like the way it does is because we're here to measure it.
It's an absolutely silly line of thinking. And what scientists always do, and what they've been, well, maybe not always, but what scientists really, really love to do is they love to try to make the universe eternal and try to make, or now the multiverse eternal. And so you have two basic options here. You can either believe that an unthinking, eternal force that's just always existed popped us into existence by accident and is going to continue popping into existence entire universes, just creating out of nothing absolutely astounding amounts of mass and material, billions and trillions of galaxies and stars and black holes. Okay, so that's where we came from. Or there is a God, a personal being that exists outside of our universe, and instead of having to eternally create more and more universes, this personal God created our universe, created you, me, and everything else in it, and decided to put us here where we are for a purpose. Those are your two choices. He's chosen the silly one, and I've chosen the one that just makes the most sense. It just makes the most logical sense that there would be a creator who created us to think and exist rationally. And what scientists always do, I mean, again, I keep saying always, scientists love to try to make our universe and now our multiverse eternal. And unfortunately, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Where is all of this stuff coming from? How did it all get created? Okay, it doesn't answer any of those questions. It just says that it's always been there and it's eternal. And every single step of the way, we find that no, it's not always been there, and no, it's not eternal. So we'll find out in a few years that that's the case, and that this multiverse concept either is silly or it explains things, but it's not eternal. I think those are basically the two options that we have. And so it's, I love Joe Rogan, and I love the varying guests that he brings on, but it was just a very silly comment from Mr. Krause.
Oh my God, we should leave it at that.
Okay.
We should close with that. That is the mind blower of mind blowers.
Good.
All right, so that was a fun little clip from his show with Lawrence Krauss. Now we're going to go on to philosopher Nick Bostrom on human innovation and technology.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
I was watching a talk that you were giving, and you were talking about the growth of innovation and technology and GDP over the last 100 years. And you were talking about the entire history of life on Earth and what a short period of time humans have been here. And then during what a short period of time, what a stunning amount of innovation and how much change we've enacted on the Earth in just a blink of an eye. And you had the scale of GDP over the course of the last 100 years. It's crazy because it's so difficult for us with our current perspective, just being a person, living, going about the day-to-day life that seems so normal, to put it in perspective time-wise and see what an enormous amount of change has taken place in relatively an incredibly short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, we think of this as sort of the normal way for things to be. The idea that the alarm wakes you up in the morning, and then you commute in and sit in front of a computer all day, and you try not to eat too much, and that if you sort of imagine that, maybe in 50 years or 100 years or at some point in the future it's going to be very different, that's like some radical hypothesis. But of course, this quote-unquote normal condition is a huge anomaly any which way you look at it. I mean, if you look at it on geological timescale, the human species is very young. If you look at it historically, for more than 90%, we were just hunter-gatherers running around, and agriculturalists what the last couple of 100 years, when some parts of the world have escaped the Malthusian condition, where you basically only have as much income as you need to be able to produce 2 children, and we have the population exploit. Like, all of this is very, very, very recent, and in space as well. Of course, almost everything is ultra high vacuum, and we live on the surface of this little special crumb, and yet we think this is normal and everything else is weird. But I think that's a complete inversion. And so when you do plot, if you do plot, for example, world GDP, which is a kind of rough measure for the total amount of productive capability that we have, right? If you plot it over 10,000 years, what you see is just a flat line and then a vertical line. And you can't really see any other structure. Like, it's so extreme, the degree to which humanity's productive capacity. So if one looks at this picture and we imagine this is now the normal, this is the way it's going to be now, indefinitely, it just can't seem a prima facie implausible. Like, it sort of doesn't look like we are in a static period right now. It looks like we're in the middle of some kind of explosion.
Explosion.
And what's incredible is that that's actually explained by the Bible. So if you look back in Daniel, it's a book in the Old Testament. That's where we get Daniel in the lion's den, and and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being put in the oven or the furnace. And so if we look back at Daniel, that book has a lot of prophecy in it. Daniel interpreted dreams and did a lot of really incredible things. And one of the things that he wrote down is that people will travel. I think in the King James, it's something roughly like people will travel to and fro, and knowledge will increase. And so that might sound like a very general statement or a very simple line, but that's an incredibly powerful statement based on what he just said. So if you look at, they're looking at it from an idea that the history of human civilization stretches back, 100,000 years when we branched off from our next nearest common ancestor. And so that's evolutionary, and I don't believe in that at all. So they're saying from that perspective, we went 4,000 years and then started our civilization. And then from there, we've just spiked in our ability to produce income and GDP. But if you even just take out all of that, extra 90,000 years that he's adding in there to that story, if you take out that 90,000 years, our capacity to produce has massively increased just in the last 50 years. So if we look at shipping, we've been able to ship things around the world at absolutely astounding rates and in astounding quantities. If you look before containerization, that's a term for the type of shipping that we do now. So all of our shipping, it gets loaded and unloaded in these regular sized boxes that I grew up calling sea containers. So containerization has massively increased the amount that we can trade between nations. Before that, we had been using the exact same method for transporting goods across the ocean since the Phoenicians, and that's called break bulk shipping. And so we saw a dramatic increase in humanity's prosperity just from that one simple change that happened back in the 1950s, and that for the previous 2,000 years of human existence, we hadn't changed at all. And so what we'll see going forward for a brief period of time is humanity absolutely increasing in knowledge and understanding and being able to travel all over the place, even off the planet. But ultimately what the Bible says is going to happen is that Jesus Christ is going to come back. He's going to wipe away all of the evil in the world, rule the world for 1,000 years. The evil's going to come back because humanity is just that broken. And then ultimately he's going to save us for eternity from evil and from the consequences of the sins that we committed. So, yeah. I just find it incredible that this phenomena that we are seeing today was explained by a prophecy in the book of Daniel thousands of years ago.
And oddly enough, everyone involved in the explosion, everyone that's innovating, everyone that's creating all this new technology, they're all a part of this momentum that was created before they were even born. So it does feel normal. They're just a part of this whole spinning machine, and they jump in, they're born, they go to college, next thing you know, they have a job, and they're contributing, they're making new technology, and then more people jump in and add on to it, and there's very little perspective in terms of like the historical significance of this incredible explosion technologically. When you look at what you're talking about, that gigantic spike, no one feels it, which is one of the weirdest things about it.
I mean, you kind of expect every year there will be a better iPhone or
Yes,
whatever, right?
if not, we'd be upset.
For almost all of human history, people lived and died, and so absolutely no technological change. And in fact, you could have many, many generations. The very idea that there was some trajectory in the material conditions is a relatively new idea. I mean,
It's incredible. We get a new iPhone every year, but 100 years ago, it was a big deal for somebody to get a new jacket. You can go buy a new jacket every single day of the year and still probably be decently well off financially. Well, your great grandfather probably only bought a jacket once every 10, 15, 20 years, or when it wore out. If you look at we look at people who were poor back in the early 1900s and before, and you would see clothes that have patches on them and people repairing things that today we would just throw away. If your jeans get a hole in them, now it's a fashion statement, but let's say that it wasn't. If your jeans got a hole in them and you didn't want it there, you just throw them out or donate them to Goodwill. It used to be that you actually had to patch those things up because we had the level of prosperity that we're at right now was drastically lower, and the level of prosperity that we have today is just absurd compared to what it was even 50 and 100 years ago.
people thought of history either as some kind of descent from a golden age, or some people had a cyclical view, but it was all in terms of political organization. That would be a great kingdom, and then a wise ruler would rule for a while, and then like a few hundred years later, their great-grandchildren would be too greedy, and it would come into anarchy, and then a few hundred years later, it would come back together again. And
yes.
So it would be all these kind of the pieces moving around, right? But no new pieces really entering. Or if they did, it was at such a slow rate that you didn't notice. But over the eons, the wheel slowly turns, and somebody makes a slightly better wheel. Somebody figures out how to, irrigate a lot better. They breed better crops, and eventually there is enough that you could have enough of a population, enough brains, that then create more ideas at a quick enough rate that you get this industrial revolution.
What he's saying makes it sound like, given enough time and enough human beings, that is an inevitable state. I completely disagree. My belief is that the reason we have had such drastic changes to our technology, such drastic increases over the last few hundred years, specifically has to do with Christianity and with the belief in a knowable, reasonable God that you can trust. Okay, so if you look at the mythology of the Greeks and everyone else at the time, they had a pantheon of gods. They were basically just humans that could throw lightning bolts and do other incredible feats, but they still had the same feelings. They still had the same anger, resentment, jealousy, all of those sorts of things that a human being does. And so you wouldn't go out and study nature because nature is unknowable. Zeus can just throw a lightning bolt whenever he feels like it. There isn't a natural process that controls that. But when Europe switches over from a belief in pagan deities and switches over to a belief in the one true God who created the universe, well, once there's one true God that creates the universe, you can start to trust him. Once you start to trust him, you understand and you realize that the creation that he's made isn't unknowable. And so if you can trust God, you can trust that he made his creation in a logical and consistent way. And so now you can go out and you can study the universe. You can study the things that God created to know more about him. And so that's where science comes from. That's where our prosperity today comes directly from people who are attempting to learn more about God and to study him and to know what his attributes are. So that I think is a fundamental difference between what he's saying and what actually really happened. And so we can directly trace our material prosperity today back to those people that were doing those things for those reasons, to know more about God.
And that's where we are now, I think.
Elon Musk had the most terrifying description of humanity. He said that we are the biological bootloader for artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're here for.
Well, bootloader, sorry.
Sorry, Joe. We're here to glorify God. God created us with free will because he wanted us to be able to love him, and he wanted to be able to love us. And it wouldn't be possible for us to love if we didn't have any choice in the matter. And so that's where we get free will from. And so ultimately, that's what we were created to do. We weren't created to create AI. We were created to glorify God.
Important.
They are important, but I think there's like objectively and there's personally. Like objectively, if you were outside of the human race and you were looking at all these various life forms competing on this planet for resources and for survival, you would look at humanity and you go, well, clearly it's not finished. So there's going to be another version of it. It's like, when is this version going to take place? Is it going to take place over millions and millions of years like it has historically when it comes to biological organisms? Or is it going to invent something that takes over from there?
And the third option is that we are going to be changed by Jesus Christ, and that the humanity version 2.0 is when Jesus Christ comes back and we get our new bodies, our new resurrected bodies that we get to exist in for eternity. And so that's going to be the real humanity 2.0. And that's what we need to be looking for. And that's what we need to be putting our trust in, is Jesus Christ coming back and saving us from saving this world from the wickedness and the sin that we have poured into it. And that's going to be what humanity 2.0 is, humanity with the ability not to sin. It's going to be incredible.
And then that's the new thing. Something that's not based on tissue, something that's not based on cells. It doesn't have the biological limitations that we have, nor does it have all the emotional attachments to things like breeding, social dominance, hierarchies. All those things are no consequence to it. It doesn't mean anything because it's not biological.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think millions of years. I mean, what number of decades or whatever. But it's interesting that even if we set that aside, we say machine intelligence is possible for some reason. Let's just play with that. Then I still think that would be very rapid change, including biological change. And I mean, we are doing great advances, making great advances in biotech as well, and we'll increasingly be able to control what our own organisms are doing through different means. And enhance human capacities through biotechnology. And so even there, a lot is not going to happen overnight, but over an historically very short period of time, I think you would still see quite profound change just from applying bioscience to change human capacities. Yeah,
one of the technologies, or one of the things that's been discussed to sort of mitigate the dangers of artificial intelligence, is a potential merge. Some sort of symbiotic relationship with technology that you hear discussed. Like, I don't know exactly how Elon's Neuralink works, but it seems like a step in that direction. There's some sort of a brain implant that interacts with an external device, and all of this increases the bandwidth for available intelligence and knowledge.
Yeah, I'm sort of skeptical that that will work. I mean, good that somebody tries it, but I think it's quite technically hard to improve a normal, healthy human being's, say, cognitive capacity or other capacities by implanting things in them, and get benefits that you couldn't equally well get by having the gadget outside of the body. So I don't need to have an implant to be able to use Google, right?
Right.
And there are a lot of advantages to having it external. You can kind of upgrade it very easily.
You can shut it off.
Hopefully you could do that even with implant. And once you start to look into the details, there's sort of these kind of demos, but then if you actually look at the papers often, you find, and then there were these side effects, and the person had headaches, or they had some deficit, and the speech, infection, it's just, biology is messy.
Yes.
Maybe it will work better than I expect. That could be good, but otherwise, I think that the place where it will first become possible to enhance kind of human biological capacities would be through genetic selection, which is technologically something very near.
You mean like CRISPR type?
Well, so that would be editing, right? When you actually go in and change things. That also is moving.
What do you mean by selection?
Well, so this would just be in the context of, say, in vitro fertilization. You have usually some half dozen or dozen embryos created during this fertility procedure, which is standardly used. So rather than just the doctor kind of looking at these embryos and saying, well, that one looks healthy, I'm going to implant that, you could run some genetic test and then use that as a predictor and select the one you think has the most desirable attributes.
And so this could be a trend in terms of how human beings reproduce, that we, instead of just randomly having sex, woman gets pregnant, gives birth to a child, we don't know what it's going to be, what's going to happen. We just hope that it's a good kid. Instead of that, you start looking at all the various components that we can measure.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to some extent, we already do this. There are a lot of testing done for various chromosomal abnormalities that you can already check for. But our ability to look beyond clear, stark diseases that is one gene is wrong, to look at more complex traits is increasing rapidly. So obviously there are a lot of ethical issues and different views that come into that. But if we're just talking what is technologically feasible, I think that I mean, already you could do a very limited amount of that today, and maybe you would get 2 or 3 IQ points in expectation more if you selected using current technology based on 10 embryos, let us say. So very small. But as genomics gets better at deciphering the genetic architecture of complex traits, whether it's intelligence or personality attributes, then you would have more selection power and you could do more. And then there is a number of other technologies we don't yet have, but which if you did, would then kind of stack with that and enable much more powerful forms of enhancement. So there, I don't think there are any major technological hurdles really in the way, just some small amount of incremental further improvement.
That's when you talk about doing something with genetics and human beings and selecting for the superior versions. And then if everybody starts doing that, the ethical concerns, when you start discussing that, people get very nervous because they start to look at their own genetic defects and they go, oh my God, what if I didn't make the cut? Yeah. Like I wouldn't be here. And you start thinking about all the imperfect people that have actually contributed in some pretty spectacular ways to what our culture is. And like, well, if everybody has perfect genes, would all these things even take place? Like, what are we doing really if we're bypassing nature and we're choosing to select for the traits and the attributes that we find to be the most positive and attractive? Like, what are like that?
And you think what would have happened if, say, some earlier age had this ability to kind of lock in their their prejudices, or if the Victorians had this, maybe we would all be whatever, pious and patriotic now or something.
Or if the Germans had it in 1930. That might not have been such a great thing.
Yeah, we know, like the
or
Nazis.
another, yeah. So, so in general, with all of these powerful technologies we are developing, there is, I think the ideal course would be that we would first gain a bit more wisdom, and then we would get all of these powerful tools. But it looks like we're getting the powerful tools before we have really achieved a very high level of wisdom.
Yeah.
My belief is that we aren't going to achieve a high level of wisdom, at least not one that could handle the technologies that we're creating, and that ultimately God's going to have to come back and save us from the horrible, messed up world that we've created. And my belief is that that's just a repeat of what has happened before. If we look back at Genesis in the first few chapters, we see that there is a civilization that exists, and then there's a flood that wipes them out. If we look at a chapter in Genesis called Genesis chapter 6, there are a group of beings, and they are called the sons of God, and they come down and they have sex with the the daughters of men? I can't remember the exact term, but basically there's a heavenly group of beings that come down and interact with an earthly group of beings in Genesis 6, and ultimately what we see in the next few chapters is that there's a flood that has to wipe out humanity. And I think that there is a possibility that there's a connection there, that we were doing things to create hybrid, angelic beings, and that led to the downfall of our civilization. One of the things that it talks about Noah when it's listing his genealogy is that he was, quote, perfect in his generations. My understanding and my belief is that means that he wasn't polluted by whatever weird demonic practices were happening at the time, and that his family had remained pure since Adam. And so I think that ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to mess things up equally as bad as we did before the flood, possibly through different mechanisms this time, more science and less demons. And ultimately God's going to have to come and wipe out humanity and save those who he has to be saved. And the choice that you have right now is to be one of those people whom he's going to save, or to be one of those people who he has to destroy. And ultimately we need to be working with God's will. We need to be accepting his will in our lives and becoming a part of it, rather than rejecting it and going against him.
We haven't earned them. The people that are using them are sort of we haven't, like, think about the technology that all of us use. How many pieces of technology do you use in a day, and how much do you actually understand any of those? Most people have very little understanding of how any of the things they use work. They put no effort at all into creating those things, but yet they've inherited the responsibility of the power that those things possess.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only way we can do it. It's just way too complex for any person. If you had to sort of learn how to build every tool you use, like you wouldn't get very far.
Isn't that fascinating, though, when you think about human beings and all the different things we do? We have very little understanding of the mechanisms behind most of what we need for day-to-day life, yet we just use them because there's so many of us and so many people are understanding various parts of all these different things, that together collectively we can utilize the intelligence of all these millions of people that have innovated, and we, with no work whatsoever, just go into the Verizon store and pick up the new phone.
Yeah, I mean, and not just technology, but worldviews and political ideas as well. It's not as if most people sit down with an empty table, try to think from the basic principles of what would be the ideal configuration of the state or something like that.
Yeah.
You just kind of absorb it and go with it. You float in the stream of culture, and it's amazing just how little of that actually at any point channels through your sort of conscious attention, where you make some rational, otherwise, but like deliberate decision. Most you just get carried away with. But that again, I mean, if this is what we have to work with, then there's no other way.
There's no other way.
Possibly, no.
There's no other way, and there's no way. Even like you and I discussing this, like discussing the history of this incredible spike of evolution or innovation rather in technology, it just doesn't feel like anything. It feels normal. So even though we can intellectualize it, even though we can have this conversation, talk about what an incredible time we're in and how terrifying it is, that things are moving at such an incredibly rapid rate, and no one's putting the brakes on it. No one's thinking about the potential pros and cons. We're just pushing ahead.
Yeah. Well, not nobody now.
Not no
I mean,
one, but
there
a
are
very
a few
small-
people. I've got my research group.
Yes.
There's actually increased. I mean, when I got interested in these things in the 90s, and it was very much a fringe activity. There was some internet mailing list, some people exchanging ideas. But since then, I mean, there's now a small set of academic research institutes and some other that are kind of actually trying to do more systematic thinking about some of these big picture topics.
Hello, freak.
All right, sorry about that. We're going to finish up with one last little quick video. I know it's been a short stream today, but it is New Year's and I have things to go do. So here we go.
Do you know Thomas Sowell?
I know that name. Why do I know that name?
Thomas Sowell is a big, famous conservative. He's at Stanford. He's at the Hoover Institute, I think. Anyway, so, within this, I mean, first, just to set all this up, we should set up briefly, how does culture work, right? And the way culture works is that it, like genetic evolution, it works based on blind copying. So what ends up happening is that you are in awe of people, right? You look up to people, and so you blindly copy the things they do. And specifically, you start by blindly copying from the outside, and then you work in. Thomas Sowell is black.
So I just want to stop right there before he gets into the rest of it. And I would just say that I think that this is absolutely true, that we do, I don't know about blindly, but we do absolutely start to copy the people that we revere and the people that we put a lot of faith in. And I think that's ultimately why it's so important for us to put our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ. And so if we are putting our faith and our trust in a lot of different things, well, we're not going to look like any one of them. And we're going to have a lot of different, we're going to have a lot of different perspectives. We're going to have a lot of different ways that we're trying to go, and we're not going to be pointed in the right direction. And so if you align yourself and you point yourself towards Jesus Christ and you look to him as your perfect example of how to live, that's going to be what you start to emulate, and that's going to be who you become. You're not going to become Jesus Christ, of course, I'm not saying that, but you're going to become like him more and more every single day. You're going to pick up your cross and deny yourself the way that you should be.
Black guy, right?
Okay.
And Thomas Sowell has for years and years and years been trying to fight racism, but he's been trying to fight racism by having a conversation about culture. Right? And the fact that there are essentially two different sort of, we're speaking broadly here, right? But this is for the purposes of communication. We're going to tell a simple story to start off with, right? So broadly speaking, he puts two different cultures of people with dark skin next to each other. And one culture is these people from the West Indies. And one culture is this group of people who grew up in the South with slavery and all that sort of stuff. Now, what one group, the West Indies group, does really well. So a lot of the successful black people like Colin Powell, are originally from that cultural heritage. The other group is the group that you find in ghettos and African-American communities and all of that sort of stuff. They don't do well, right? They don't get good education. They, shoot each other. There are all these sorts of things. And the reason why Sowell has been telling this story is because he's been trying to say, when liberals look at the people in ghettos, they say, racism, that's why they're not succeeding. And Sowell is saying, no, it's not. Because if you look at this group from the West Indies, they also came from the experience of slavery. There was slavery in the West Indies. They are also black, so they also face racism, and yet they do well. So it has to be something else. And that other thing is the fact that these black people who are in the South, there's always been a big question, were black people robbed of their culture? Or did they preserve their authentic African culture? And what Sowell is saying is that they were robbed of their culture, and so they picked up the culture of the people around them, and the people around them were rednecks. And if you look at the white redneck culture and the black redneck culture, they have a lot of the same values. They don't particularly respect education. They love Jesus. They use violence in their conflicts. and they, there's just, a lot of the same values and a lot of the same outcomes. And even Ebonics, which is, Black English, is actually all from the west of England. So it's actually this.
What?
It's from the west of England. So, for example, if you go to places like Cornwall, there used to be these amazing ads on British TV, right, for this Devon custard or whatever, and they would always say, Devon knows how they make it so creamy, and they all talk like this, right? And so it doesn't sound like Black English, but they do say things like, I be doing that, and we be doing this, and you be doing that, and they be doing that. And so there's that use of that copula be, right, where instead of saying I am, you are, he is, she is, they are, they just say I be, you be, we be, they be, which is the classic feature of Black English, African American vernacular English. Right. Now, the point is that
Mind blower.
Now, let's imagine that. How do you think that Thomas Sowell has been received by liberal America? Not well.
Not well.
Not well. And so, for example, Sowell has a book called Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Okay? And his whole point is that, if you actually, and, again, like Sowell is, he researches the shit out of this stuff. He really does his work. Now, if you look at the experience of African Americans after slavery, they start to make real progress. Right? And a large part of the reason why they make progress is because you start to get a lot of people from New England, either, Black people from New England or white people from New England, who come down and sort of reshape the culture. They create these schools and they're teaching those New England values, right? It's those Puritan values of hard work, tenacity, all of that sort of stuff. And so there's all this progress. And you have people like Booker T. Washington. And Booker T. Washington was an actual slave. And then after he got his freedom, he got to go work in a salt mine, which is literally the worst job ever. And in Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, he tells this great story about seeing a schoolhouse, right? And that, he thought that going into a schoolhouse was about as close to heaven on earth as you could get.
Whoa.
Like, this is a dude who wanted an education really, really badly. And that's a lot of what you find in the, early Black experience in, the post-slavery period. And in fact, Blacks, before sort of World War II actually had higher rates of marriage than whites, all of these sorts of things that, are now supposedly a problem. And then there's this turnaround, right? The Black experience starts to go south, right? It starts to get worse.
And what year is this around?
This is post-World War II, right? So
post-slavery, Black people experience a rebounding.
They're starting to make some progress. There's ambition.
Progress.
Yeah. And I mean, if in terms of books to read, like, because a large part of what I'm trying to do in general is really let's move to the place of all people are created equal. Like, let's remove all these stupid distinctions, right, and really live that principle. And the problem is that in order to really live that principle, you need a new narrative that beats slavery. So, it's not, if you go and talk to racists, you can't just say racism is bad. Like, that doesn't destroy racism, right? What destroys racism is when you make sense of the things that they know, right? They see, people who are violent in the ghettos, or they see crime, or they see a lack of education, or they see that Africa is poor. And you're able to tell a better story that makes sense of the things that they know, but also comes out with the conclusion, oh, we actually all have the same potential.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. Unfortunately, I don't have time to continue, so we're going to cut it a little bit short today. I appreciate you joining me. Sorry for the couple slips of the language there. I hope that isn't a huge issue for you, and I hope that you have a wonderful New Year's Eve and a great start to your new year. Happy New Year. Goodbye.